It gives us a lot of insight, I think, into the persons and the events that were really key to you later becoming the person you've become, both the scientist and the atheist. And I thought it would be interesting for the audience. I know there's so many characters in the book, and I really do commend people to read all of them, but maybe you could pick one character who you feel was a great influence for you in terms of the scientist you've become, and one character who was a great influence for you in terms of the atheist that you've become.
Well, before I do that, and I will do that, since you mentioned beautifully written, I'd like to plug a book. I'm now about a third of the way through the Book of Rachel, which I read because I knew I was going to be having a conversation with Leslie. It is a beautifully written novel, which I strongly recommend, from the point of view of Jesus's little sister. Now, of course, it's fiction that he had a little sister, but the story of Jesus is fiction anyway, so that doesn't matter.
That's right.
And it is beautifully written. It's starting to blossom into a love story. It's actually rather sexy.
Is anybody recording this?
So anyway, that's my book recommendation. Now, the question was...
About your book, that's right. We're going to talk about your book.
A scientific influence. I would pick, actually, not Nico Tinbergen, who was my official supervisor and a very eminent Nobel Prize-winning scientist, but his sort of number two, Mike Cullen, who actually ended up in Australia at Monash University and was an enormous influence not only on me, but on all my contemporaries. Might I even read a little bit about...
Please.
I can find the... I'll have to look it up in the index where it is.
So if I reach out my hand royally like this and go like this, it means I would love to have a slide. Could I have one? Pretty please? No, boy, oh boy. No. Back. There we go. That's all I was trying to do. You can tweet on that.
Right. So this is from the eulogy that I read for him at his funeral in Wadham College, Oxford, after he died in Australia, explaining that he devoted his life to his students and colleagues rather than to his own personal aggrandizement. The worldly success of scientists is judged for promotion or honors by their published papers. Mike did not rate highly on this index, but if he had consented to add his name to his students' publications as readily as modern supervisors insist on putting their names on papers to which they contribute much less, Mike would have been a conventionally successful scientist lauded with conventional honors. As it is, he was a brilliantly successful scientist in a far deeper and truer sense, and I think we know which kind of scientist we really admire. Oxford sadly lost him to Australia. Years later, in Melbourne, at a party for me as visiting lecturer, I was standing, probably rather stiffly, with a drink in my hand. Suddenly, a familiar figure shot into the room, in a hurry as ever. The rest of us were in suits, but not this familiar figure. The years vanished away. Everything was the same. Though he must have been well into his 60s, he seemed still to be in his 30s. The glow of boyish enthusiasm, even the red sweater. Next day, he drove me to the coast to see his beloved penguins, stopping on the way to look at giant Australian earthworms, many feet long. We tired the sun with talking, not, I think, about old times and old friends, and certainly not about ambition, grant-getting, and papers in nature, but about new science and new ideas. It was a perfect day, the last day I saw him. We may know other scientists as intelligent as Mike Cullen, though not many. We may know other scientists who were as generous in support, though vanishingly few. But I declare we have known nobody who had so much to give, combined with so much generosity in giving it.
Oh, it's beautiful.
As a teacher, how do you reconcile encouraging students to think for themselves and come to their own conclusions while still maintaining the sort of authority figure that you need to maintain in the classroom?
While still maintaining what, sorry?
The presence of authority that you still need to maintain to keep a classroom more or less under control.
So you're worried that there's a kind of incompatibility between encouraging children to be questioning and maintaining discipline in the classroom, because too much questioning is... where is the question? I can't actually see.
Over here.
Oh, yes.
Hi.
Why don't you stand up?
Yeah,
Because it's hard for him to connect with you if he can't see you.
I mean, I think that's a very interesting question, and I've heard stories, quite a lot of stories of children who've questioned the religious studies teacher and been thrown out for it because they don't like the idea of being questioned. I would have hoped that if the question is an honest, intelligent question that really stems from honest skepticism, honest curiosity, that the teacher should welcome it every time.
Oh, it's not about dismissing questions, it's more about the balance of keeping discipline in the classroom while encouraging kids to not blindly follow authority.
That is tricky.
Yes. I haven't much experience of that. My teaching has always been at university level, which I suppose is similar. I'm not sure that I quite understand the problem.
Well, think about it. At university,
time?
you get up on a podium, and in some ways, the university setting actually gives more authority to us as lecturers because we're sort of on this kind of a dais, almost like this. Whereas you're talking about a more primary school, high school classroom?
Secondary school.
Secondary school, yeah. So maybe it's also just this issue about you have to manage kids more when they're not at university.
I mean, the only problem I can see is that if a child is particularly argumentative, it might waste everybody else's time, but otherwise I can't see a problem with it.
Point taken. Thank you, Richard.
Who else needs a mic? There we go. Go ahead.
This is just a comment, really. You don't have, it's not a question, but I mean, I've heard you talk, Richard, over the years on many forums, and personally, I would like to hear you occasionally talk on evolutionary biology, which is your specialty.
I would love to talk about it.
And that's what I want to hear you talk on, mate.
In fact,
a bit of atheism in between times.
Sorry, I missed the end of that.
I said, that's what I want to hear you talk on, mate, is evolutionary biology and a little bit of atheism.
Yeah, talk about evolutionary biology and atheism.
Let's do it.
Yes. Well, do you want to? Can you say what's going on in evolutionary biology?
Let's say that if there are questions on that, I can.
Okay, so maybe someone has a specific question. We'll see what comes up. Go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, hey, Richard. Over here to your right.
He's over there.
Keep waving.
Can you turn the lights down a little so we can see a bit better? Great, thank you.
Hey, I'm a video game designer. I'm a firm believer that video games are a great way to teach children as they make concepts fun and they can learn deeply complex things while still enjoying it. But I've come across this problem where, so like physics is a quite easy thing to convey in a video game. You just give them a few, basically, gravity puzzles to solve. But what would your sort of concept of teaching biology and evolution be in terms of making it fun to the younger crowd, just like elementary students?
It's obviously rather hard to actually demonstrate evolution in action in the classroom, because it tends to take millions of years, which we don't have. You can do it with computer simulations, and I myself wrote, I think it was the first in The Blind Watchmaker, and then more elaborately in Climbing Mount Improbable, computer programs which simulate the artificial selection process. If you think about what you would wish to do if you wanted to do an experimental test of natural selection, artificial selection is exactly what you would do. You would breed from some animals and not from other animals. You would consistently breed from the largest and the largest and the largest in each generation if you wanted to make the animals get bigger and so on. So I wrote a series of computer programs in which what you see on the computer screen is a parent animal in the middle and progeny, mutant progeny, all around. And the mutants are slightly different from the parent, and the child chooses which of the progeny to breed from. And so you go through generation after generation after generation, and you see before your eyes, you see the average form changing. One of the versions of this that I published in Climbing Mount Improbable was snail shells, or mollusk shells generally. Mollusk shells are very precisely mathematically defined. So it's very easy to simulate them on a computer. And you can literally breed your way from any shell to any other shell by artificial selection on a computer screen, and it only takes a few minutes to get from one shell to another. And I think that's one way in which you could do a sort of hands-on thing. You can do a hands-on demonstration of particular problems in evolutionary theory. For example, one of the problems is, how can it be that the same selection pressure that produces the final finishing touches to say, the resemblance of a stick to a stick insect, how can it be that the same selection pressure that does that final perfection of the mimicry of the stick, of the stick insect to the stick, how can that same selection pressure produce the initial crude resemblance that starts the process off? This is something that often occurs to people. And the answer, of course, is that the seeing conditions vary. When a bird is looking at insects under a bad light, or out of the corner of its eye, or from a great distance, even a very crude resemblance of an ancestral insect to a stick would be enough to make the bird overlook it. But when the bird is looking at the thing in a full frontal view in a bright light and close up, that's when the stick insect has got to look exactly like the stick, to the last detail. And there's a ramp of improvement all the way up. Well, you can demonstrate that by actually having the children, present the children with insects on I've done this, with insects on a, say, a fake woodland floor with dead leaves and twigs and things. And you can have some insects which are very, very beautifully camouflaged and others which are not at all well camouflaged. And what I did was to have this sort of tableau at one end of the room and have the children approach step by step and signal when they could see an insect. And the crudely mimicking insects they could see from a long way away. And then as they got closer, there were some that they couldn't see even when they were right up close. So that's another thing. By the way, a slightly nice story about this. There's a caterpillar that looks like a bird dropping. And Stephen Gould discussed this very problem I've just been talking about, how the original resemblance is favored by natural selection. And he said, what is the good of being 5% like a turd? And so I described this in The Blind Watchmaker. And when it came to the index, I love jokes in indexes. So I put Gould SJ, 5% resemblance to a turd. And it was published in the original British edition of the book, but the American publisher vetoed it. I think possibly because Stephen Gould was one of her best authors. And so the American publication was held up, I think, for 3 weeks while the index was changed. Then the British publisher fell into line with the next printing. And so the first edition, the first printing of the first edition of The Blind Watchmaker is a collector's item. Probably worth a lot of money.
Yeah, over there.
Mr. Dawkins, can you tell me, please, why many people still need to believe in supernatural gods and religious concepts like creationism, despite science has proved these concepts to be false?
I wish I knew. I think, I mean, we've dealt with some of the issues this evening a little bit. I think childhood indoctrination is enormously important. I think we've seen how very difficult it is for people to shake off the terrible imprint of childhood indoctrination. And even the particular case I gave of Kurt Wise, who was prepared to admit the evidence and still reject it. There's an even more extreme case, which is an American professor of astronomy, astrophysics, who writes learned papers in the astrophysical journals with advanced mathematics, and his learned papers, published papers, all assume that the universe is between 13 and 14 billion years old. But he himself privately believes it's 6,000 years old. Well, that is a testament to the power of, I suspect, childhood indoctrination. I think of nothing else that would have the power to make a physicist capable of such doublethink.
Is this working? Hi, Richard. I'm a primary school teacher, and I work in a public school. And at our school, we have religious studies for half an hour a week. Some of these kids go to Christian classes, others to Hindu classes, others to Islamic classes. But there's a lot of parents that are opting their kids out at the moment to non-religion for half an hour a week, while the other kids go to their religious studies. And during this time, they just sit and read a book, and they don't actually participate in any kind of educational activity. And I'm wondering what you think would be a good idea for us to teach them in this gap. And if we could start creating like a network where we could have things that are as powerful as what they teach kid at Sunday school or something like that.
Well, you certainly could teach moral philosophy and that kind of thing, but I'm going to suggest something else actually, which is that you shouldn't have these separate classes, Hindu classes, Muslim classes, Christian classes, and so on. What you should be doing what you should be doing is teaching about religion, teaching children that religion exists, teaching children what the different religions believe, teaching them how this has made an impact on history, which it has enormously and still does, but not segregating the children off and saying, you're Hindu, you go there, you're Muslim, you go there, you're Christian, you go there. That's wicked, that's evil. That is a form of child abuse, to label children with the religion of their parents when they're too young to have made up their own minds. So teach them about religion, because it's important that they should know about religion. Teach them about all the major religions so that they can make up their own mind when they're old enough, what, if anything, and of course teach them about atheism too.
And can I just add, just so that you know, in New South Wales, they're teaching an ethics curriculum in that space. That's all being run by volunteers in a similar way to the people who are coming into the schools to teach scripture. In Victoria, they've taken Richard's position, which is that they just don't belong in school, full stop. So instead of trying to add into that space and then compete, the view is they should be out of the schools, and about 50% of the schools have now disengaged from special religious instruction. So it's working.
I do think it's important to teach the Bible as literature, because it has played such an enormously important role in our English literature.
So we'll have this question, then we'll have one more, and that's going to have to be it. Okay, folks?
My friend and I, we debate Christians and so forth all the time. And we come up with this main argument, and you've heard it many times yourself, I know. In terms of, they always bring up the argument, atheists are always just as bad. They're just as bad. The Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, they always bring up these same examples. Do you think we should just concede the point and be like, okay, that's it, we're just as bad guys, we did all the same things? Or should we be, no, that's not correct. You know, should we be keep fighting this argument even though you keep hitting brick walls constantly?
Yes, I mean, of course. This is one of the sillier arguments which we meet all the time. Incidentally, Hitler was not an atheist, but even if he was, it wouldn't signify. Stalin probably was an atheist, but the important thing is that Stalin did not do his evil deeds in the name of atheism, any more than he did them in the name of the fact that he had a moustache. Hitler had a moustache, Saddam Hussein had a moustache. These are incidental facts about them, which have nothing to do with the fact that they were evil, tyrannical dictators. You can make a very strong case, and Christopher Hitchens did this very well, that both Hitlerism and Stalinism and Mao Zedongism and North Korea, Kimism, are religions of their own kind. They're not supernatural religions, although the North Korean one is pretty verges on it. But they have all the trappings of a religion. The Nazis actually had a prayer. Well, it was a sort of grace that you said before meals, which was pretty much thanking Adolf Hitler in exactly the same language as people thank God for the food. There's a version of Our Father, which in Nazi Germany, which had exactly the cadences of Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, etc. It was sort of Adolf Hitler, da 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 da. It's got the same kind of rhythm of the Our Father prayer. Hitler and Stalin and Mao Zedong and Pol Pot and Kim Il-sung and so on did not do their evil deeds in the name of religion. That really is all that should be needing to be said. But you can add that in most of those cases, they actually invented their own quasi-religions.
Okay, so this will be the last one.
Yeah, I've got a question in evolutionary biology. What I'm interested in is, what are your thoughts in our globalized world where we are so interconnected? Where will evolution go with the human species? How will it look like where there are no subpopulations anymore, for example?
The reason you stress the interconnectedness, I presume, is that there is no possibility now for the human species to split into two species. The normal thing that happens when a species gives rise to two daughter species is that a geographical accident separates two populations so that they no longer have gene flow between them. There's no longer any genetic contact between them, and so they're free to evolve in different directions. That would only happen if we perhaps set up colonies on Mars and there were no further intercourse between Earth and Mars. So I presume that's why you mentioned interconnectedness. The general question of the future of human evolution, I suspect that biological evolution is completely overshadowed now by the breakneck pace of cultural evolution in humans. The evolution of technology, the evolution of social customs is so rapid that any incipient biological evolution that might get going would be swamped by it. It's also the case that, at least in the first world, it's quite difficult to die young. So the cutting edge of natural selection is blunted, to say the least. And we're now left with a natural selection of who reproduces more than whom, rather than who survives more than whom. And who reproduces more is, of course, non-random. I mean, there are some people who do reproduce a lot more than others. If there were a genetic component to those differences, then we would have, by definition, natural selection. But that would only be translated into evolution if the selection persisted over a large number of generations. And that seems unlikely because a large number of generations would span a huge amount of cultural change, technological change. So, for example, if it were the case that a lot of people are born because their parents are incompetent at the use of contraception. If there were a genetic tendency to be incompetent, then we have natural selection. By definition, we have natural selection in favor of incompetence. That's the way natural selection works. But whatever it takes to be incompetent today in 2014 is unlikely to be the same as what it would take to be incompetent at the use of contraception in, say, 2114, let alone on a time scale where we'd expect evolution to occur. So I think it's very, very difficult to make any forecast about the future of human evolution, except to say that the vast majority of species that have ever existed have gone extinct.